Okay, but I will just get started because I think we are already a little bit behind schedule, and we will have now the various case study presentations. What about so I think the key question here is, if it's such a good idea, why doesn't it scale up? And of course we have been grappling with that question for quite a while, and I think the main reasons are institutional in nature. So last year we were requested by the Rockefeller Foundation to do further research into the institutional opportunities and barriers for scaling up MUS. And how did we do that? We looked into each of these 4 entry points that I presented at the beginning: domestic plus, irrigation plus, self-supply, and the community plus. Try to characterize those a bit more in detail, but then look at what are then the potential and barriers for these as basis for identifying scaling pathways. And that framework was then used to in 5 studies and 5 scoping studies in 5 countries: India, Nepal, Ghana, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. And IRC did the ones in India, Ghana, and Ethiopia. We took care of the other countries. So for now, we'll only present the 3 in which IRC was involved. So the domestic plus, I think we have already talked about mainly in this morning, because I think that's the main one of interest of IRC, which is really about providing higher levels of services, building on good practices of community-based management. In some cases, it also includes add-ons like capital trust. How to do it: the structured planning approach that Marika presented, and bringing this livelihoods perspective in all phases of the project cycle, and I should probably say service delivery cycle, to be consistent in IRC terminology. Examples of that where we have been doing this is in Zimbabwe, in the guidelines for livelihood-based planning for rural areas, together with UNICEF Zimbabwe. In Ethiopia, it's now starting with a new community-based water and nutrition project, but also a little bit with accelerated self-supply. In Honduras, where we have been doing pilot projects in the World Bank-funded rural water supply program with gravity-fed schemes. And I think there's been a lot of experience also in Nepal with gravity-fed schemes in the Middle Hills. The Irrigation-plus approach is basically one of providing water for all needs and crop management, but often through infrastructure adjustments and management reforms, largely because there is very little new irrigation infrastructure being developed. It's largely about rehabilitating, retrofitting, modernizing existing irrigation schemes. It can be through add-ons, it can be through the provision of bulk water and formal drinking water supplies, and it's also about these about conjunctive use. So the Irrigation-plus approach is about that, and the how-to, basically the opportunities for taking this further are largely to the FAO, with they have developed a whole methodology called MUS for modernization of large canal irrigation schemes, which is about assessing multiple use of water in such large irrigation scheme, assessing the value generated, and recognize and use these in canal modernization efforts and irrigation management reforms. An example of that is work that we did together with the FAO in the Krishna Western Delta in Andhra Pradesh in India, where we looked into how canal irrigation supplies domestic water really for millions of people, either through bulk water supply, through conjunctive use of groundwater, and but also through the kind of in-stream uses. And we assessed the extent of these and what it means in the modernization plans of irrigation schemes, so that these modernizations at least don't negatively affect the domestic water supplies, but actually could even improve them. For example, by having better recognition of towns and cities in the management structures of the canal irrigation schemes, by dealing with by thinking through, for example, canal lining, which often is found to have a negative effect on groundwater and thereby may deprive millions of people of water supplies. Self-supply, which is really about climbing this water ladder from unprotected to semi-protected. But I think I will leave this a bit further to John, who will talk about this in the context of Ethiopia. But taking MUS forward through self-supply, is one of users investing themselves, but also supporting that through supply chain development market development, technology development, and I think maybe it's also something for the WashTech project to contribute to. And finally, the community-based MUS, which is around adding a stronger participatory planning to broad water projects, so not domestic or irrigation, but broad water projects, or even water components in broader participatory programs. And I think Urian will explain on that a bit later, where basically communities are empowered to decide which water assets they need for any type, and what you will find then often is that they try to combine multiple sources for multiple uses. What we then did is we assessed each of the 4 entry points in terms of the potential and barriers, which are mainly institutional nature. The mandates of water supply agencies, irrigation agencies, or local governments, and try to elaborate that a bit. An example, and the example I take is Domestic Plus, because I think that concerns us most here in IRC. The market potential, I think earlier studies by Winrock estimate these to be 1 to 2 billion people. Depends a bit on whether you look at the ones not served but who could be served by MUS, or people who already have a certain level of service but which can be enhanced. And this is based on the assumption that 60% of the poor have the kind of assets that we need to benefit from this. The opportunities, I think a key opportunity is actually the drive towards higher service levels. As we have reached the MDG, I think many governments are now concerned about gradually improving service levels. And I think there's of course an opportunity there of the higher return per dollar investment. Some of the observed barriers and concerns, and I think this comes very much from talking to engineers, to the Mr. Cabrisis and the Mr. Gazes and the Mr. Tupacs in various agencies across the world. These are some of the concerns that people express. Are we going to use high quality water for irrigating a vegetable garden? How do we deal with that? How do you deal with treated water? Should we invest in higher levels of service for people who already have something, or should we first try and cover everyone with that basic level of service? I think it's a key trade-off and a key concern. I think also the sector targets and the performance indicators of sectors. If sectors' main target is providing basic level of service for everyone, there may be less incentive to what Ton was suggesting, going for an intermediate level of service for certain regions. And I think what is also a key concern or key, is the capacity at service authority level or of staff of the agency for how to do this livelihood-based planning. So what are some of the scaling pathways that we see to address some of these concerns? Is above all making what we have called making MUS models more robust and probably more contextualized by having a very clear definition of the service levels and differentiated for different types of settlements or different parts of the country. To have clarity on how to go about targeting to address issues of inequality, and when do you provide a certain level of service and when do you provide others. I think what we need to work on very strongly within the whole MUS community is to have clear criteria to measure performance. When do we talk about a good MUS system and when it's a bad one? Are we happy with de facto MUS, or should we always strive for the unplanned or for the planned MUS? I think what we also further need to explore is this whole relationship between sustainability and the extent of MUS. What are the financial mechanisms to make sure that you put water into money and money into water, the slogan of the Ripple project, how to make that happen, what we saw in Senegal and Kenya. Can we build that into the models that we have? So in the end, what you need is a kind of MUS service delivery model. And I think we have been having already some discussion. Is MUS a different service delivery model in itself, or should you actually talk, no, it's a service delivery model for higher levels of services, not for the basic level, but for higher one. I think that's a bit where we had the discussion. During the coffee break, we were saying, is MUS even one of the building blocks of service, sustainable service at scale? I'm still a bit wondering about that. To me, the essence is the higher levels of services. With some of these aspects around it, the capacity, the applying the livelihoods-based approach, and so on. But I think this is still where we need to make the MUS models more robust, where we need to do our homework. And then, of course, there is the scaling bit, the institutionalization, which is about increased awareness raising, advocacy to identify where there are limitations in policies and norms and standards. I think it's also very much an idea of not to have parallel MUS projects or MUS programs, but rather build upon existing programs to leverage public and private finance. And I think Marike will talk in the case of Ghana about a drive there is in Ghana towards going from point sources to what they call limited mechanical schemes, small motorized pumps with a couple of standpipes, implying that water is brought closer to the houses, will imply slightly higher levels of service and may enable more MUS. And I think these are the kind of leverage mechanisms that we need to think about. But then also thinking, is that a public investment or is that an additional private investment by users themselves, or do you need to come to some kind of cost-sharing mechanisms? And I think very much the recommendation that I think also came from the work of Winrock, we should try and concentrate our work in MUS in a few areas, countries, where there is heat. I think we have also maybe with the whole MUS movement been very opportunistic, do a bit of pieces here and there, and then sometimes then you don't reach that tipping point and then it all falls back a bit. I think South Africa has a case in point where in the initial work we did quite a bit around multiple use, but then you lose the momentum if there is no follow-up on that. So I think that's I think a failure a bit, I think, on the MUS community side to not follow through in those countries where momentum has been generated. In some, yes, I think, for example, Nepal is probably the poster child case where really this has been followed through from various projects, programs with different government agencies and NGOs. But even there, more is needed to reach that tipping point. Maybe to say a few words on the scaling internationally, I think we have now as a MUS group 12 core members, over 350 individuals on the mailing list, doing the advocacy, knowledge sharing, promoting innovation. I think some of the successes we have had in scaling internationally, and I'm now talking a bit with the international program hat on, is that we have been able to establish, I think, a great information base with case studies from, I think, over 100 case studies from all the countries there in green. Also joint concept development, get that common language, get the common understanding, and even there I think we are sometimes struggling. And I think also some of the international organizations have adopted the concept, the approach. I think particularly USAID, who are now funding various MUS programs in Rwanda, and I think in West Africa, in Niger, in Mali with Winrock. I think also in Nepal. FAO. The Wawash. There is a MUS component. And also the FAO, who are applying this in their technical support to large irrigation schemes in India, in Vietnam, in China also. So I think there is some uptake, let's say, at that international level. Challenges that we have is, I think we really struggle to differentiate our the messaging, the targeting to the key audiences, because we have 4 different entry points. We come from, let's say, different constituency. We come always with a domestic water supply hat on. IMI always comes with an irrigation hat on. We try to put too many messages in our basket because we try then also to talk to all these subsectors, and I think that has not been easy. And I think what has also been a challenge for us is to establish a relation with bilateral donors. Even with the other side of the road, it has been difficult. And then you read in the policy note that came out, when was it, on Tuesday, MUS is being referred to, but as being very important, very interesting, but it's not really part of the DGIS policy for funding their program. So I think there are some, sorry? As yet. And I think there's a bit of a tension there, and I think also with all the bilaterals, getting that contact going, in a more structured way, also with DFID, for example, has been difficult, or a bit ad hoc, I would say. So I think we have had also some challenges there in scaling this internationally. So I think what's a bit on this whole scaling issue, I think MUS started off as what we said, recognizing reality, but now we are moving into structured implementation, although at project or program basis, and trying to overcome these institutional barriers. We have now a wealth of case examples and pilot experience culminating in these standardized guidelines that Marike just showed. Still, I think still quite a bit of work to do to make these models more robust, elaborate, think them through more as service delivery models for higher levels of service, and make them fit into context, or rather, in different contexts, work on service delivery models that work. And I think a final conclusion is that sharing and learning is key, but that we need to further differentiate our messages and be more specific in our messaging. And I think the new support we are receiving from the Rockefeller Foundation will explicitly target that we improve on our communications and advocacy, and that will be a piece of work that we will be working on for the next couple of months with the MUS group, and Sarah is most likely going to help us also with that. So I think that is great, and will also allow us to further align the messaging with what we say in MMS, in WASCOS, in the international program. So I think this is a general picture of where we stand in scaling. Unless there is a question for clarification, I would, rather than first go to the 3 country case studies to get a bit of a flavor what this general picture means for the 3 countries that I just mentioned.